Oh, Benson, thank you very much. I have an image. Of being at the Robert Jackson Center, formerly the Consistory, and there you are walking down with Dan Bratton, our first executive director, and there was a board meeting in the area which was sort of the hallway, and there was Carl, there was Betty, Dan, you, and you know, that's an image. And how did you connect, probably with me and the center and Dan? There's a whole lot of questions there, but it was,
right.
It was early on.
I got a phone call, and I thought, honestly, it was from you. And it was just that I was a grant writer in the area, and you were going to need one. And Dan, I had known from my dissertation on Chautauqua Institution. He was one of my best interviews. He dove deeply into what Chautauqua was about and made it clear. And he and I were kind of on a, we were a friendly basis. And when we came together here, I was amazed, because to get to work with Bratton is, interview him is one thing, to get to work for him is another. And he had this calm, clear, accepting image of what was coming in the future. He could see that there was a number of things we had to do. It would take years for some of these things to come to fruition. But right now, it was just, let's get the books settled, the bylaws written, the committees formed, the boards going, et cetera, et cetera. And that was one of the sweetest working partners I ever had. He was amazing.
So did he give you a call? I think we reached out regarding the grant writing, but did Dan, how did you connect with Dan? Did he just get on the phone and say, Paul, I need your help?
Honestly, I don't recall, Greg. I remember the first meetings at his house. Mm-hmm. So we had to have connected somehow. And he might have given me a ring, under your instigation. But the meetings at his house were very productive. We would sit on his patio and just kind of churn on where he thought the place should go, and I would sit there and take notes. And the pleasure of being able to just have somebody who could astutely see through the quagmire of legal procedures that we would have to go through, to the point of building the kind of characters that you want on the board. It was all the kind of formation information that Dan would talk about, because he's written and run Chautauqua Institution for 16 years, something like that. So he knew how to be philanthropic without any pressure. He was a great handler of diction and being able to find funding. So that was wonderful too. And he was well connected all over, and I enjoyed, the fact that he was connected to half the world just through being the president of Chautauqua Institution.
Did he talk to you about his meeting with Justice O'Connor shortly after he came on board? He had a prearranged meeting with Justice O'Connor in Washington that he then went down and saw, and he told the story, and I'll do this for the camera. Essentially, that he got into her office. He said, Dan, what are you doing? Well, I'm retired. Dan, what are you doing? Mm-hmm. And he said, well, I got caught up in this Robert H. Jackson Center. And then he said, I'm just kind of getting my feet wet. And then she dug out a legal pad, handed it to him, and dictated a variety of things that she would suggest he do, because she was a big fan of Jackson, including calling the Library of Congress and setting up an appointment that afternoon for him to meet the curator, and then he reported back the following week to me. Mm-hmm. Do you get any sense of that sort of instant engagement
with
O'Connor,
Justice?
He was so enthusiastic.
He did, and he had I think it was his spiritual confidence. He was confident in, and this is what I got out of the interviews too that I did with him for my dissertation, was that it was more than a calling. It was his ability to be able to use the skills that he had acquired over the years in service. So he was always in service. He wasn't in acquiring, or the reverse of service. So and to have Justice O'Connor call him, no surprising, or for the two of them to get together, because I know that she had been to Chautauqua many times. I had seen her speak there myself. She walked the grounds. It made sense to have that kind of connection, and then to have that come to us immediately with the Jackson Center was a remarkable kind of score. And I'm sure she gave him great advice.
You sent to me last night, and I read with real interest, a document entitled Preserving the Legacy of America's Advocate. The Robert H. Jackson Center for Justice is currently renovating its facility to accommodate program and conference area, exhibition space, and climate-controlled and secure space for a house rotating collections from the Library of Congress. And it even talked in the present tense about the executive director, Dan Brad. So this was written early on.
2002.
And what precipitated this?
This was part of the grant writing strategy that we were getting together. We wanted to have a base proposal that we could work from, and I do have the proposals that we did send to the local foundations. Mm-hmm. So we needed a document that just kind of summarized what we were up to, where we came from, what we were starting, and where we were going. And the local foundations were very supportive, and I'm sure that your connections had a lot to do with that. But it was such a great idea, in its time, to have Jackson come from Jamestown and be recognized was, I understand from your point of view, just critical. We had to, you know.
Would you get the sense, again, tying in Dan, he actually wrote a log, a diary, a mission, a document that we have.
Really?
Sort of a game plan, if you will, looking forward. I suspect it was part of the work product that you generated with him, or these guys forced him to do it. Did he talk to you at all about, because I developed, and it was pancreatic cancer, fairly early on.
Right.
I mean, he really didn't get into and during the prognosis, or during the diagnostics and the and prognosis and what kind of he really worked like heck. Did you work with him during that time period when knew his end was fairly clear? Yeah.
I was there just after they had filmed his final video for all of us, right. Really. And we had talked through the afternoon, but he was calm, accepting about it. He didn't appear to me to be unshaken at all. I'm sure he was at a certain point, because that's a death sentence. But he always kept his composure and his love for people. I gotta give him, that's what he was made out of. I mean, you don't get very many men like that, and I'm sorry we lost him.
We had board meetings at the center. You attended, and I can remember Dan and Dan actually being there when we named the theater, because we had separately Carl Kappa, one of our founders and financial folks. We named the theater, and that was part of it as well. So, do you get a sense from your own personal perspective what was going on? I mean, there was a lot going on. Yeah. Not only the idea of a Jackson Center, two key men kind of contracting cancer, and things were going to happen quickly. Did you get a sense that there was an immediacy to this whole thing?
I got the sense that everybody was serious. There wasn't a board member that you had picked, or that you and Dan had picked, that wasn't on fire for the thing. So I sensed a serious commitment to getting this off the ground correctly, giving it the lift that it needed politically, suturing it into the Library of Congress, of course, and to national government. I know that Raleigh, when he came on board, started to work with our assemblymen and our state senators. I think he went to U.S. Senator's office and was successful in procuring funding. But everybody had a task, and we were more or less trying to keep everybody on line, because they were all such pit bulls for getting this stuff going. I mean, it was such a good idea, Greg. It was just perfect for Jamestown, and I think it's what Jamestown needed. I love the Lucy Center and I love the Comedy Center, but Jackson was I feel this leveling presence of Jackson in town and a very high quality level of thinking. You know, we picked the right guy and we were lucky to be in the right town.
You, from your position, which is, I was a grant writer, and knowing people like Rick Walters and the gentleman from Panama,
Drew Biter.
Drew Biter was the young guy, and then there was there was a teacher.
Joe
Carb. There was Joe
Carb, right?
And an older guy who worked with them. I'm trying to think of his name. I couldn't this morning.
Yeah, me either.
But you had a concept, an idea of the history grant with Senator Byrd implemented, and how did that kind of work in your world?
Well, it started with a footnote, honestly. When I had written out a plan for the website, and I was on the education committee with Rick when he was chairing. And Rick, by the way, was from Panama, had come to Jamestown Public Schools with Ray Fasciano to be his special projects guy. So Rick was running the education committee at that point, at least he was chairing it. And I had, in this long, it was kind of long because when you do a website at that time, of the Robert H. Jackson Center, right? And at the bottom of this webpage design, I had put a footnote. This is just a joke note. Has anybody read this far? Rick read it. And he caught it, and I knew this guy's sharp. And after that, Rick and I formed an instant friendship. And one of the two of us had heard about the Teaching American History grant that was being put forward by Robert Byrd of West Virginia. Apparently Senator Byrd had been talking to some college students, and they didn't know which part of the century the Civil War was fought in. They didn't know about the pandemic of 1918. He would ask them basic American history questions, and he was appalled. Put $90 million into an account, and they started their first year, and Rick wrote that proposal for the first year, and he scored. And because we had worked so much together, I looked like the most successful candidate, and they hired me. So that grant, if I remember right, we wrote the Jackson Center in for a nice chunk, and we continued to do that. And we had, the Jackson Center was such a place to bring people and bring teachers in to feel this aura of this giant of the 20th century. And Rick was right on. He was one of the best bosses I ever had. I don't think we ever had a real disagreement over time. It was more was better, and we treated our professionals, our teachers like professionals. We brought in the best speakers we could find, and of course, that went on for 9 years.
So it made it remarkable though, when you look at I'm sure you have the list of people who you brought in here, and not only their credentials at the time, but subsequently.
Sure. We were very fortunate to get people like Peter Ronoff, who is the chair, Thomas Jefferson's chair, the University of Virginia. We had specialists in, basically the grant was set up for civil rights, international affairs, and political law, I believe, something along those lines. I got 2 or 3. So we would bring specialists like maybe Jeremy Surrey, who's just finished a couple books on Kissinger, and he brought in folks from the White House, and so the connections that we did make had connections. We'd bring them all in, and it was fortunate that grant was flush. You know, they all were. The 2007 incident kind of killed the whole program, but with the funds that we had, we could provide materials. The website was an extensive, beautiful website for teaching from. We did elementary folks through high school, and we had a great rapport all the way through. We were allowed to pay them. That helped a lot.
Yeah.
You know, right.
And again, I recall how much our programming was enhanced by bringing in the people you had. And I also remember your summer event was sort of a chock full year, a week or two
right.
of boom, 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 boom.
Right.
And many of the folks that we even subsequently had here were alums now of Jamestown, and having been at the Jackson Center, even when I wasn't, didn't appreciate it at the time. The Alita Blacks of the world,
Alita Black, yeah. Alita was a fireball, still is. And we are still in contact with her, and she was working with Drew Bider's Academy for Human Rights last year. I gave her a ride to Buffalo. So that was an enriching part, I think, for all the teachers and myself, because I got to take all these guys out to dinner and stuff. So they would get to question people who knew deep answers with deep facts. Peter Ronoff was one of my first speakers. He talked till 11 o'clock, and he was on the Constitution. That was my third part. And I said, Dr. Ronoff, you haven't mentioned the Constitution yet. And he said, I've been talking about it all morning. And he was talking about Jefferson's European envy. He was talking about, Benjamin Franklin's fun in France. He was building this whole picture of who the men were and who the ideas were that produced that Constitution. After that, he'd say the word Constitution, yell, is that good enough for you, Benson? And he came back 3 times, brought his brother back once.
Yeah.
It was great.
I'm trying to think of the person that I spent some time with who was from University of Wisconsin.
Sure.
Madison. Who was
Jeremy Surrey?
That was Sir Jeremy?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh.
Yeah, he moved. He's at Austin now, but he's a rockin' star with the Kissinger stuff.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah.
And I remember Paul Finkelman.
Oh, Paul was one of my favorites. He was the attorney who was in the debate about having the 10 Commandments on the courthouse lawn. I forget if it was Alabama or Mississippi. Yeah. And Paul was one of the main attorneys for taking it down. He had story after story after story, and 37 papers a year. Yeah. The guy was just a machine.
Well, we had him here because of you on a couple of things through a Linnaeus Foundation grant. St. Bonaventure brought him to St. Bonaventure. Then I brought him here to speak because he was in the middle of the legal arguments of the ownership of the Barry Bonds 73rd home run, the one that was an all-time record, and went into lawsuits, and he was the expert.
Yeah.
Somehow he was the expert on that.
I don't know how he did. He's everything sticks, and he knew how to put it into perspective. And his talks on that would specialize in things. The most engrossing part was the conversations with teachers. He would grab their idea, never with just snap, and he'd have something running on how to answer that question. Paul and I had many dinners. I really enjoyed his presence, and I actually thought about writing him a couple weeks ago and see what he was up to. But
yeah, I don't know, but I came here. We did a CLE, he did a St. Bonaventure, and I, of course, with you as well.
Yeah, and he's teaching at Albany, where Robert H. Jackson went to school for a year. That's
right, and so he's a jack of all trades, master of it all, too. Incredible. So, during that time period, you were working in the Jackson Center, among other locations, and website enhancements and other things. During that time, we went from Dan Bratton and Raleigh Kidder, and you were working with Rick and Drew. And talk to me about Drew specifically. How did you connect with him? Because he becomes quite a part of the story.
Yes, he does. Drew came to our, when we opened up in our second grant, because initially our grant was for the 18 school districts in Chautauqua County. Our second grant expanded to Cattaraugus and Allegheny County. And when we did that, we had fresh dollars and we're working again. And Drew came down as a participant. And I think he spent 3 summers with us and picked up the model. And Drew was one of these guys that liked to create new projects for his students. And he began the Summer Institute for Genocide Studies at the Angola BOCES. So he had seen the way that we worked and how to treat teachers like professionals. It wasn't just a BOCES, sorry BOCES, but it wasn't just your standard professional development where you get your things stamped for so many hours and go. We brought our people in and we jazzed them. Drew took the same approach, and he started the Summer Institute, and it was all for kids. It wasn't for teachers at that point. This was about 15 years ago, I think now. Mm-hmm. And he has been drawing, and this year, I'm on the board now. They brought in students from the Congo, Bosnia. We have one of the big sites to I Am Syria was done by one of the students, and what's happened is the students have started to become board members. You know, they've grown up, they're in their careers, and they're working well, and they're taking on their own projects, and we have them on committee, and they're working with us really well. So he actually turned students into historians, students into activists, students into studying human rights as Eleanor Roosevelt spelled them out, and as Alita let us know.
Yeah.
You know?
Drew came down here, and you guys would do a weekly event at the Jackson Center. He was working with the Henry Kings, the Gabriel Bachs, the David Cranes.
Yes.
He was able to tap into those resources, and then even that led to quite a relationship with David Crane in Syracuse. It continues. What makes this guy tick? What makes people tick? I mean, it's unbelievable.
From what I know about Drew, he was like in middle school the top candidate for this certain award, and he got it. Got the same award as a high schooler. He was constantly on the move. I don't think Drew has slowed down since he was born. And the more that he saw how our project worked, and he'll admit this, right away. He said, "I mimicked the program that Rick Walters and Benson designed, and it worked." Then he turned it into an all-day thing for kids, and now he's working on adults. He's working with teachers, and that's where I think he gets a lot of this drive. Is we're bringing the right things to the right people at the right time. These are things that we can't ignore. Last year he did climate change. Yeah. How does that affect society and our thinking? Year before that, it was the Constitution. And we're working up, we're going to start doing a fall and a spring, but of course we're going online because of our COVID condition. But in those webinars, they're just chocked full of material, and we're working on those now. If he sees something more to add that he thinks is pertinent, he adds it. If not, he'll pull it. He has a great capacity for management and seeing the big picture and then the inner parts working together. So I think that's probably how he's been all his life. And when he got his hand on this, he didn't let go of the tail because it was making a difference. And I think that Drew wants to make the difference. He's traveled widely. He this year was invited to Poland, to Auschwitz, to give an educator's speech. So over the time now that we're talking, which is getting to be 10 to 15 years, he's started a school in Rwanda for people to learn not to commit genocide. That is still going well. He's a starter, he's a motivator, and he's just got that engine. You got that engine. You know what it's like to go out and get her done, and that's what he likes to do. You know, I don't know if it's his parents, his genes, is just who he was, but
that wasn't his professional launch. Was not teaching. He was in another world before he even decided to get into teaching.
Really?
He was like mail carrier or something like
that.
Oh
yeah. And he worked in that giant canyon out west, Yosemite. Yeah. All right. Yeah, he did have some neat stuff before I did teaching. And then when he started teaching, it was at Panama, and that's where he met Rick Walters. So the two of them had a formal kind of connection together, and I think that's how he was drawn to this. And he's great friends with Rick as well.
You, in the formative years of the Jackson Center, was our go-to guy to not only create the grants that we were looking for from the Gebby Foundation, Sheldon Foundation, and other things like that. Did you interplace with their executive directors? Did you get into that level of depth of detail, or were you the scrivener?
I think I was the scrivener, but I knew most of the directors, especially Linda Swanson, who has always given me a balance and a read on Jamestown for how things are. So she and her board, and of course the Linné board, who else did we have in there? Hilbert, and we had, I think we had everybody in town on that list. Yeah. Carnahan Jackson, etc. Mr. Carnahan and I happened to have a friendship, so that was a good conversation. Getting in there and telling them what the Action Center was and where it was going and why we needed them, that was a conversation we always had. But that's why we drew up some basic documents to just see, okay, we're going to define ourselves, we're going to pull in the kinds of dollars that we need, and then those dollars will help us with the credibility that we need to get larger grants. So it was all a building process. It was always, let's secure this so we can get that.
I'd forgotten about this document, but we used that a lot in I know Raleigh did with the state, federal, and whether it was the department. I mean, it's got a lot of circulation, so delighted to revisit it. Did you get a sense from, we're new, I mean, we were new in 2001, we were kind of just a concept, and you're out there banging on doors and writing stuff 2002, I mean, you were right there. Did you get a sense of what they were thinking about, the funders, about this nascent organization?
What I got is a sense of pride out of them, a sense that we've got something coming to Jamestown that's going to be remarkable. And I think the majority of them, all of them, wanted in. This was something that they were designed for. This is what these local organizations or local foundations, they were established when Jamestown was in its heyday. This was a way to serve Jamestown again. And your credibility is high. And when we came along with you and then Raleigh came on, they had no worries about how their dollars were going to be spent. They were going into this and they were going to make it work. So I got the sense that there was this community of not only acceptance but excitement on how this was going to come together.
To me, it was interesting, without belaboring the serendipity of Carl's, my meeting with him, separately with Betty, Debbie Foundation, and so on. One thing to your point that I found remarkable now, I didn't appreciate it at the time, was Debbie Foundation extended to us a $500,000 in operating money.
That's right.
It's unbelievable when you think about it today.
Right.
And we had no plan. In nowadays, you give something like this in 2002, you prepared it, so we kind of covered ourselves.
Yeah.
But in 2001, we were flying by the seat of our pants, and because, frankly, it was Carl and Dan and Betty. And do you have anything, Greg? We probably had a paragraph someplace. This is what we plan to do. We got to have $1 million. And then I remember Chuck Hall, again, this is more for the camera, calling me at the time. He was the president, saying, you've just been given $500,000. Here's how it's going to be phased in, and it's operating money. Could you send us something?
Yeah. Sure. And that might have been it. There was, I think, in the initial sense, we were looking for relationships as one aspect of it. So there was, where were we in Ohio? Was it
Case Western?
Case Western.
Yes.
And yes, that was an early.
Yeah, Mike Sharp. Michael Sharp. Right.
That was remarkable. But Bowling Green was another one. Let's see. We had the two books. We had the first book. We had That Man by Gerhardt. We had the building. We needed a program. I think everybody had ideas at that point, and out of the notes that Dan and I took, eventually this formed, and then sadly after Dan passed, and good for us, Raleigh came aboard, and we started really working on the grant section that way, and just a couple programmatic things, I think, as well.
You were good memory on the Case Western. That was very early on.
Yeah.
That came through Henry King.
Right.
You remember Henry King?
Yes.
He was a professor, adjunct professor at Case Western, which then introduced us to Michael Sharp.
Michael Sharp.
The P.T. Barnum of Case Western.
Yes.
Fun to be around. And that led to the use, again, this is for the camera, many organizations, including Case Western, we were able to early collaborate with. It could be in St. Louis with the Washington universities, because of Whitney Harris. They wanted to use the name Jackson Center. Even though we were trying to build a track record, but we're kids. But they wanted the name. So therefore, we became co-sponsors on a boatload of high-end, high-profile programs. That's Nuremberg, Legacy, etc.
Yes.
They invited me and others to go down there, but for nothing. We didn't have to contribute anything other than the name. So a whole lot of craziness was going on because of a few connections,
Right.
which then expanded ultimately to the law dialogues, which was another Bowling.
Yes.
That was Bowling Green.
Really.
And you were all part of that, Paul. I mean, and I can try to say this document, this kind of guides the guide bar. We use that a lot.
Yeah. And I remember those early days as well when Raleigh secured funding for the pointing of the entire building, a new roof, the windows that came from Hope's that they installed, polishing and doing various parts of the auditorium so that it came online. That boardroom and Raleigh's office. And we got the history of the building, so we knew who was behind it and why it looked like it looked. And I think all that just finally came together as one story, and we got to get it on paper. And then, of course, we expanded it for separate roles that you were doing programming-wise.
You mentioned earlier off camera Maggie Peterson.
Right.
And she was intimately involved with our having a joint conference at Chautauqua,
Yes.
Nuremberg, which we brought in a lot of scholars and we mixed them with the Nuremberg prosecutors.
Exactly. Yes.
That was cool.
That was very cool.
Even got a call in from Abby Mann, of the author of Judgment at Nuremberg, that day. And so Maggie was very much a part of that, and that Fredonia connection, of which you kind of enhanced, led to the book, Gail Jarrow's book about Robert Jackson, and then there was a reader's guide and a teacher's guide that we'd never had any, first of all, no books, let alone anything like that. And then Fredonia adopted it and created it. And you probably were in the middle of funding all that.
We went up and met with them and talked over with their. We met with their whole history department, and that's how Rick and I got to know them and get to work with them.
Yeah.
And of course, I can't say more about Maggie. She was she was a hurricane. You had to stay out of her way and just watch what happened in the wake. She was remarkable at everything.
Yeah, I think it was that red hair that really took it to the soul, didn't you?
And at Adirondacks raising,
Exactly.
chopping wood.
You got a notepad full of interesting stuff.
I have a notepad to keep my memory straight.
Both of ours.
Yeah. Let's see. We made our connection, talking about the same line of hopes and getting the building secured. I remember us setting up the connection with BOCES, because we had it was very early in the internet days, and we were wondering how much bandwidth we could bring in to and then BOCES had this whole solution with Mike Beba, exactly, Mike Beba. And between him and Rick and the funding that we could provide, we got the place wired finally.
That's right, I remember.
That's
You
great.
mentioned it, yeah.
Yeah. So those things were critical to teaching with, and I remember we were testing it, because we put in boosters in a couple places, and that way we could broadcast out to the entire BOCES network.
That's right.
And that was fantastic. Rick Walters, his guidance was to let me go, and as long, with a certain amount of paternal observance. So when it came to finding the kind of the best stuff for this stuff, Rick was always behind me for that. And his connections as one of the fathers of distance learning in the county really helped with that BOCES connection, and he was ahead of the game when it came to websites. So Rick was really in tune with the 90s form of the websites, the kind of things where we put everything on it to make sure you don't understated somehow. Now websites are clean and smooth and they take you in directions. We just provided everything.
I remember all the linkage you had. It was
Yes.
unbelievable.
And he would keep that thing up every 2 months. He would go in and redo all the broken links, etc., and keep it frying. And we had people using that in class. We always used it at our conferences, and it continued to build. And that's I think some of the stuff that Drew used when he set up his.
And so it was really Rick and you. Were there others that were part of the grant process?
Yeah. Carol Carlson was an IT person from BOCES. I think she's going to shoot me. But she was absolutely remarkable because she was she had been taken out of the classroom and only did technology. So one of the things that the teachers were worried about at that point is here comes this flood of technology from the future. How are we going to adapt to it? So I think we're one of the first groups to start giving out USB drives. We started training teachers on just using the basics of the internet itself because we had to go out and safely search. And that was a time when we were really worried about children getting into the wrong places. So he would teach by example by saying, let's go to the Martin Luther King site. And as you know, if you go to martinlutherking.org, it's owned by the Klan. And a lot of kids could go to that place and hear some very terrible things. So we gave that kind of knowledge to teachers. When you see .com versus .edu, it's going to make a lot of difference on what kind of content it is. .com and an org is still not an edu, but it's probably got very reliable information if it's a good source. Those little tricks, that we could get people to go through and find information quickly and be able to use it instead of searching and floundering. And I think we saved a lot of people a lot of tension maybe and stress around that, which currently we're going through again, of course, with COVID.
What else is on there? I want to make sure I asked the questions that I should have asked and not wonder what happened.
Well, I've got Braden as level-headed and kind because he was. His idea behind building and your idea behind building a strong board was essential. There wasn't a weakling on that board. Everybody was ready to go. Raleigh's rebuilding of the building, bringing in program, hiring folks to be at the front door to answer questions. Little things that started to make us more and more of a population destination. Then as Raleigh worked in the other extensions, like putting in the elevator, putting in the archive, putting in redoing the entire downstairs speaking space, grabbing the art that you guys grabbed that's on the walls down there, which is just intimidating and educational, of course. But he got it faced. Everything was repointed, redid the wiring. That's all that behind the scenes grunt and work stuff that had to be done. And Raleigh was right on top of that. And I love working with Raleigh that way. So we started, I've got the BOCES. TAH came up with dollars, and that was sweet. I think it was 10 a year. And we started getting teachers in, and eventually we started bringing students in. That was kind of the chronology that I had. And getting students in there now, I was there with the leader last year, packed to the roofs. I think they measured how many people they could get in your auditorium, and I took one extra seat. So it's those foundations that we're producing what you're doing now, which is crazily good. It's just that early stuff. And John Barrett, holy cow, coming on. And what did he do? He brought Jackson's book, which was That Man, Insider Portrait of FDR. Yeah, and that was John, because he edited it and forwarded it, and Oxford University Press doesn't get any better. Yeah, so that was a great book to read and to have. And then we had the Gerhardt book, which we reproduced. And when I called Hunter this morning, he goes, there's my copy of Robert H. Jackson's Gerhardt book right on the shelf. Yeah.
For the camera, because it may get lost, Gene assigned all of his rights from Houghton Press to us. so the royalties, and then we had it reprinted, and that was enhanced by a second publication that Gerhard had just on the opinions of Jackson. So we combined the two, and really Gene's last act before he passed away, he autographed 200 copies of that.
Right.
And so if you don't have one, hurry up.
I think I do.
Probably one or two down at the Jackson Center.
I think I do.
Yeah. But that and the other thing that was critical in a conversation we had with you because of preservation of history and the Teaching American History grant was to do this, what I'm doing right now, filming.
Yes.
We made a decision, I don't even say early on, that we would film everything that we could for posterity.
Right.
And now this year, because it's our 20th anniversary coming up, trying to post everything that's up there, and just had an intern actually put it in chronological order.
Nice.
And we got almost 14 million hits on the Jackson Center's YouTube site. So that's part of the history that you very early on, and Rick, and just that aura of grab it while you can, because you got 80 and 90-year-olds
exactly.
Who are coming in, and you may have one bite at the apple, and it turned out that's exactly right. So yeah, that's all part and parcel, probably never articulated, and I don't know if it's even here, that when preservation of oral history
yes,
is to me a major part.
And you caught stories from a lot of people that were old. I remember, I think it was a priest. Was he a priest?
Father Fuchs?
Yes, Father Fuchs. Yes. And the doctor that was attending the Nazi criminals at Nuremberg.
Dr. Latimer.
Dr. Latimer. Remember the patent picture? Hunter got to put on, my son Hunter got to put on Goering's ring.
Oh my God.
And it was this, of course, enormous thing that barely, and that did something, because my son is now an attorney, of course, and he wrote an essay on civility in law, and he used the Jackson, his experiences at the Jackson Center as the basis for his information on what he thought of civil leadership. And Case Western University gave him a 3-year full tuition paid scholarship to law school. Wow. So thank you, Greg.
Well, he's given back many ways, and Hunter, hopefully you'll see this. I still recall with a sense of pride when you, with your Eagle Scout outfit, gave the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag at the William Rehnquist event.
He did. It was at the Athenaeum. That was terrific. Yeah, that was a great day too. I remember that time, yeah. Well,
not only that, but off the front porch of the Jackson Center when Rehnquist spoke off that front porch, Hunter was part of that. So, yeah.
Amazing.
Thanks for making him available.
Sure, sure. Thanks for making a career in law, where it should be. Sure.
So what's the question I should be asking Paul Benson? I mean, you're a rock star.
Oh, I'm not a rock star. But I think we made it a huge effect. There was a huge impact by the Jackson Center, and it came to the people that needed it. It's not something like our comedy center, which serves the world in a different manner. This was about human rights. This was about people's lives. This was about genocide. This was about the real stuff of the world that made the Jackson Center an important point for us to focalize or to understand these larger impacts of law on the world. Having the prosecutors come together was one of the most empowering things I think you could have done for the students that were in that room. And I understand the prosecutors liked it as well. How do you do that without the Jackson Center? You know, the place became an icon and a fixture, as it is now, for its credibility, for its instruction, for its education, for its use for law credits. It's always busy. And the folks that you've had, I'm sure, over the time that you've picked up in endowment, et cetera, and I've just watched it flourish. So for me, every time I drive by, and now that I see Robert out front, excuse me, you know, it's it's just a fascinating and powerful place. That's my opinion of it. And I'm glad Jamestown's got it.
Well, and I'm glad we connected with you very early on, because you guided us in so many ways, and I'm glad you brought back to my memory this thing last night. It was fun to read.
I've got, well, I should probably just give you all my files.
Yeah.
I've probably got a couple of gigabytes just on information that we did. I will. I'll send it down to you.
Yeah, that would be great, because we're gathering.
Yeah, I'll throw it on a drive.
Yeah, that'd be terrific. Well, thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Greg.
This is great.
I learn more every time I talk to you.
You know what that man is now.
Good, wonderful, awesome. I love that. Somebody else, a friend's, a colleague's wife is reading the book.
There's Jeanette. Jeanette and Mrs. Kappa. The older lady. That's Carl Kappa's wife. Yeah. Jeanette's on the right. Yeah, on the right. And her husband's coming up right there.
Very, very pleasant flight. Figures in here, we had a mock trial on 3 little pigs versus a big bad wolf, and they put it on. And all the kids had jury cards, and the judge from Mayville came down in his black robe and instructed the jury and stuff, and then they voted as to who was liable. And
what did they find?
I think they found that the pigs were liable and not the wolf. But
Now that's Rudolph Hess.
that's Hess, yeah, next to Goring. I think
Yeah,
it's
that's
Ben
good,
Ribben.
that's good, yeah.
Ben Ribbentrop is behind. But this guy that came in, I don't know if Greg told you, he had 100 photos that the Army had let him take back from the war, but he didn't have negatives. So we took pictures of the pictures to blow them up and to make this exhibit.
Oh, yeah.
So we were very lucky. Shakespeare, according to Henry King, who's an attorney who's been here and written a book about Shakespeare, that at the end of the war, when Hitler ordered him to destroy the industries in the Low Countries, he refused to do it. He just didn't tell him. And when he told him to order the destruction of industry in Germany, Bavaria, he didn't do it. And so he knew the end was coming and why he destroy it.
Yeah.
And he knew Hitler was crazy finally at the end. So I think that's the statement.
Oh, it's a very interesting assembly of stuff.
We're going to bring you into the section in the house, which is the former mansion.
Need more up there?
Yeah.
We need to walk up the stairs. Johnny.
Hey Greg, you know where I'm on a photo scene? They want me to do something outside with the media. Is that all right?
I am Raleigh's wife. Welcome.
Good to see you.
We're happy to have you.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Okay.
I'm just happy.
I'm Melody Loftus.
Very glad to meet you.
Yeah,
where's the clipboard? Very glad to know you. Oh, sure. I was at your parents' wedding.
My brother's Tom and Bob right here.
Very glad to know you. Very glad to know you.
I'm Vanessa, Tom's daughter.
Very glad to know you.
And I'm
Know you?
Okay, David, you want to set it up?
I'm Dave Anderson, the photographer.
Oh, glad to know you.
We'll have you have a seat right
Nancy Jackson.
I'm very,
His daughter-in-law.
I'm very glad to know you.
I mentioned before.
I think I remember.
I was scared stiff.
Smile, 1, 2, and 3. Hold on a second. That was just a toss. Okay. This is the real deal here. 1, 2, and 3. All right. You might have noticed I forgot the little mounting thing for my tripod, so I'm improvising here. Okay, and again, 1, 2, and 3.
Plaque from Longfellow when you start up the hill. The heights by great men reached and kept were not achieved by sudden flight. Do they still have it?
Yeah, they
But
do.
they, while their companions slept, were toiling upwards in the night. Sounds very Longfellow.
Okay.
I just graduated from that's where I went.
Did you? Well, it's as much. It was just a voice.
Okay, can you face towards me? Good. Okay, that's fine. And if you would just have your hands crossed for me. Okay, that's fine. Okay, looking right here. Great. And one more. Seems like there's always one more, doesn't it?
Really good sport.
That's good. Right at me.
He was born, of course, in 1892, grew up here in the Jamestown area. He was admitted to the New York bar without having a law degree and developed a very successful law practice here. He was also active in the state Democratic Party and as a result became a friend of Franklin D. Roosevelt. After Roosevelt became president in 1933, he brought Jackson to Washington as general counsel to what was then the Bureau of Internal Revenue. Jackson rose rapidly in the executive hierarchy, serving as Assistant Attorney General in the Antitrust Division, Solicitor General, finally Attorney General. Justice Louis D. Brandeis expressed the view that Jackson should be Solicitor General for life, a high compliment from one who did not bestow compliments casually. When Roosevelt elevated Harlan Stone to the Chief Justice in 1941, he appointed Jackson as Associate Justice. Franklin Roosevelt died in Warm Springs, Georgia on April 12,